Hey, welcome to the Vintage Vibe. And this week we're going to finish off our part 3 turntable shootout, and then we're going to move on to bigger and better things. Man, I got a lot of material I've got to edit together, and my apologies for not being back sooner. I appreciate each and every one of you, especially when you've got a channel this small. I mean, all the subscribers we've got, the whole 2,500, let's say, really mean a lot. I appreciate you joining me here today. So let's get right at it. And before we get into the turntables, I want to show you something pretty neat I've been fooling around with. I've got to give this guy a shout out, Brian Prue, because he makes a great little product using some vintage components mixed with some modern components and a whole bunch of know-how. Let's go take a peek at it right now. So what we've got over here is a cool little integrated tube amplifier made by proulxaudio, little stereo class A, 2.5 to 3 watts per channel. That's about it. Uses a interesting little tube called a 6AQ5, kind of common back in the day in TVs as well as little tabletop radios. And talking about tabletop radios, what it uses for an output transformer in here is little transformers for German type console radio, as well as a new, as you can see here, Hammond transformer, a little 1000 UF main filter capacitor, and on the back of it you've got provisions for one input as well as a little IC power cord, which is kind of neat. Really been enjoying it. Got to give Brian a shout out. I'll put his contact in the comments just in case you're interested in something like that. So let's start with taking a look at the Miracord 45 made by Elac, German manufacturer, kind of similar to Dual in a lot of respects. Both kind of from the same time period. Both you'd find those turntables, particularly in German type consoles, as well as North American consoles. I mean, you probably find these in electro homes and different stuff like that. So they were kind of a budget-minded turntable, robust. They made single play as well as changers, both idlers, and they kind of had some similar quirks in a whole bunch of different ones. Let's take a look at what I experienced in trying to get this thing ready to play. Elac Miracord 45, little German turntable, resembles a lot like a Dual, right down to the little metal base. Sits on springs with these little rubber nipples, which are all distorted, as you can see, and they will kind of sit right into the plinth, allowing it to kind of bounce up and down. Hopefully not too much. Talking about bouncing up and down, I've got the table suspended on some strawberry cartons here so that all the components underneath have been lifted off the ground. We got no stress on them. The motor there has also got some springs on it, so suspension type. I do believe it's an idler, no belt on this guy here. So being able to prop it up like this is going to allow me to give it a service, give it a cleaning, adjust it all, and we'll have a good spare turntable here to do a review on and maybe pass down to somebody else. Had to attach some temporary RCAs on it, just splicing them, soldering them, and then using some heat shrink. Not the prettiest way to do it, but allows us to get it up and test it. These here are kind of distorted, so they're not doing really anything. I'm going to try to heat these up with a heat gun and try to get the shape back in them, so we'll put something into there and try to reform it. Hopefully the process of heating and cooling down will kind of get them back in the state we need them. Now, when I had it connected, I got a very, very slight hum through one speaker. I do believe that the ground is just through the power on this because we don't have a separate ground cable. However, when I disconnected the CD player, the hum seemed to go away, so it could be just a ground loop that we're dealing with. Anyways, stay tuned as we give this Miracord a service. Okay, so let me show you what I'm doing to fix the suspension on this Elac turntable. As you can see here, this kind of nipple here looks like kind of the end of a baby bottle. This is what this metal platter actually is suspended on. What actually happens here is the base, these springs attached, kind of rest like this. They cup it, into these little nipples, and this tip will actually, down here on the ground, you can see I'm working away, fixing the plinth. The tips go into these holes and kind of sit in place, and that provides that kind of spring as support for the suspension. Now, with them like this right now, all twisted, as you can kind of see, they just collapse on themselves with any weight, and they're effectively doing nothing. So what we're doing is I'm using a form, which I've decided this is big enough, and I'm actually inserting it, you'll see, in the bottom of this nipple, and I'm applying some heat with a heat gun, doing it kind of in stages, slowly applying it so we don't overheat the rubber, and bringing it back into form. Now you can actually see two of them here I've already done. They look bang on, and I'm treating it in some rubber saver, hopefully to loosen up and make that rubber a little supple so it stays as is. Okay, so as simple as taking this little form, we're going to call it, putting it in like this to help straighten it, and then we're going to start applying the heat. Now you can see I'm slowly kind of trying to manipulate this to regain the shape, and it's starting to work out. Actually, you can kind of see here already we're getting a long way, or along the way. Now we have to be careful not to hold it too long, because what will happen is you'll you might be able to see a little teeny edge there. You start to kind of melt that rubber if you get a little too close, a little too long. However, it's a fine balance because we need enough heat to do something. Let's get back at it. All right, you can see we're actually getting much closer to the original shape. It's working. We're slowly letting it cool down in between treatments, trying to see if the rubber holds its form. And we're going to do it one more time before we add the rubber renew. All right, that is, I'm going to hold on the white background so you can see it a little bit better. That is pretty much it. I mean, we've gotten really quite close back to the shape that these were intended to be from what it was prior. And now we're going to put that rubber renew on it to try to soften it up a little bit, to keep it supple, and be on our way to putting it back together. All right, there we go, rubber renew on it. And we're going to let these sit, absorb some of that, give them a wipe off, and we are done. All right, got this table assembled. I'm going to share with you a couple little tips. This is a automatic Elac, very similar to the dual turntables by design. Automatic meaning we press, for example, the 12-inch record function, and the arm will cue itself in position, then drop down where it needs to be. It also has an auto return. I really like the look of this table with the chrome. Gives it kind of like a 1960s look to it, and that's exactly the period this turntable's out of. So it should look like a 60s turntable, but it's a cool looking table. So I've gone ahead and I've kind of flipped this turntable upside down and tried to understand how it's designed. And again, lots of gears, levers, kind of wheels underneath there. And once I kind of figured out how it works and what interacts with what, then the next step was to give it a cleaning. So a little bit of compressed air, lots of Q-tips, and where there was originally kind of clear oil, I used a sewing machine oil. And where there was originally like a lubricant grease, I went ahead and I used a white lithium grease. I know there are other products out there that are designed specifically for this purpose, like the original ones used in duals and Elacs, but just to get up and running, a little dab here and there. if it was a keeper turntable, yeah, I'd go find that original stuff if I was you, and just take the extra time to do that. All lubricated. Then I used some electrical contact cleaner where there was contact points that looked oxidized. For example, behind this head shell, it makes contact with 5 little metal levers, and they were all black, so I pulled that right out and gave it a really good cleaning. Got that oxidization out. There was also one other point down here, kind of near the cam of the turntable, where there was a contact point, again nice and black. The idle wheel, which is kind of a rubber wheel right about here, makes contact with the inside rim of this platter to make it spin. So both clean the rim with some 99% alcohol, and took some very light grit sandpaper, as we got here, rubbed it along the edge of that wheel because the rubber gets old and hard and it will slip. So just kind of clean that up a little bit, then use some alcohol again over top of that once we clean it, and that gives us the best kind of friction point possible between the wheel and the rim. You can hear it's nice and quiet right now. Really can't even hear that wheel moving, which is good. Next step now is to, once we verified everything works, which it is, we're going to connect it to an amplifier and make sure it's nice and quiet. Okay, it is 100% functional. It's nice and quiet. We've got it in the plinth now. No weird ground noises. And it is kind of a cool looking table, I must say. So some parting comments on the Elac, or the Miracord 45. It's not a bad turntable, but it's not great either. I mean, keep it in perspective. Let's kind of say it as it is. It's an inexpensive turntable. They made them for realistic. You found them in, you know, things like, you know, console stereos and stuff in the era in the early 70s. Kind of is what it is. I mean, it's a $50 to a $75 turntable unserviced, maybe as much as $100, $120 if you can find one with the actual plastic, you know, cover on the top, the lid. The lids were so cheap. I mean, this is like the plastic they used over top of, you know, remember little Hot Wheels cars? And it just was really flimsy and it would crack, and that's why nobody has a cover anymore for these. At least with the duals, if we're going to compare it to a dual like a 1218, you find more of them with the covers than not. I'm not saying they don't crack, but they're usually there at least. So what did I like about the Miracord? What did I not like about it? What I liked was it was easy to service. We already said it was inexpensive. I bought mine for 50 bucks. I mean, I thought, how bad can it be, right? I mean, it's German. It's an idle drive. I like the idler turntables for just background music because I think they're kind of, like I said, melodical, and they've got a, you know, nice rhythm to them. It's great for grabbing a beer and just listening to some tunes and not kind of getting overly critical about anything. It's got 4 speeds. In case you got a diverse record collection, we're talking, you know, 16 RPM, 33, 45, and 78, whereas the dual is going to be a 3-speed. That may or may not matter. Probably doesn't. It does have, you know, adjustability for different size platters, which is kind of neat. You know, the push buttons kind of reminds me of like the 1960s cars that had the push button, you know, on the dash for the transmission. I think it's just kind of cool looking. So that's a big plus. It's got a nice heavy platter like the dual. So turntable weighs about 22 pounds, and that's mostly in the platter. It's not the plinth. The plinth is marginal at best. It's 4 pieces of wood. I mean, not even wood. It's 4 pieces of baseboard basically jointed together with no dampening, no bracing, and that's partially why you're not going to get, like, you know, a really dark, quiet background with the turntable. It might also be part of the reason why the rumble spec on it is, I think, measured in negative. So negative 50 dB on the Elac, whereas the dual is going to be negative 59. The 59 is better, just in case you're wondering. That means you're less likely to hear the mechanical noise on the dual than the Elac. It wasn't bad, though. I mean, like, I was listening to it through a Marantz receiver and a pair of, you know, KLH speakers. So kind of period correct. And it's not critical listening. It's just put on some tunes. So if you're looking for something inexpensive and you can find one really cheap that's working, you might want to consider it. But if you got an extra $100, if you can sell something, anything, and get an extra $100, take back some of your empties, you know, to the liquor store or whatever and pay for the Dual if you could, because the added features like having a adjustable pitch control on the Dual is a plus. Because if the Elac's not running true, it's just not running true. The Dual, although the platters aren't great, it's better. You usually have a lid. The suspension is, kind of adequate at best, marginal, right, on the Elac. Like, let's face it, they just did it because it was cheap. These little springs with the rubber nipples. It's not great by any means, but it does have a lightweight arm. It's fairly interchangeable with most of the cartridges you're going to find from that era. You like the Sures and stuff like that. And it's got viscous cueing, so it doesn't just drop on your record like it would with a Victrola. And I think they came factory with elliptical styluses too. The wow and flutter, it's both the same as a Dual 1218, so 0.1 versus 0.09. But again, if you could save up a little bit, why not get a Dual? And I mean, unless you just like how it looks, kind of like me. Anyways, let's take a look at the Mitsubishi, and we'll chat about that in a minute. The Mitsubishi linear tracking turntable. There is the linear tracking device right there with the dual motors that pull the arm across, and listen. Yes, a unusual wobble coming somewhere, I'm assuming, from that platter right there. The thump, the thump, the thump. And there's the motor down below, sitting there on a little spindle belt drive with the separate IC circuit board. There's a lot of stuff in here and a lot of things to go wrong. So let's take a peek at the Mitsubishi and some of its features. This guy here is a Mitsubishi linear tracking turntable. This is called the LT-5V. And again, another piece that I've had kind of sitting aside here on the Vintage Vibe. And if I can just remember how to open it. See, that's how long it's been sitting. So the record gets put in as such, and this, I'll call it a clamp, holds it in place, and then the arm kind of linear tracks across the actual table. As we switch there, you can see the power lights up on it. And again, this arm will just kind of glide right across the record. Gliding right across, well, our hearts, because it's a beautiful turntable. But as you can see, looks aren't everything. Be prepared with one of these guys here to invest in some maintenance. And this may not be one that, well, you can just kind of open up a manual and do on your own. There's a lot of moving components in here, literally. And it's pretty complicated. So some final comments on that Mitsubishi. It is a cool turntable. There's absolutely no doubt. I mean, it is Miami Vice cool, right? I mean, could you imagine in the 80s linear tracking turntables coming to the market? I mean, just prior in the 70s, these big, wooden hulks like the Dual 1218 we were talking about. Now you got a turntable sitting on its side. In fact, I think the claim to fame, or one of them, of a linear tracker was you could pretty much play it on, in any position or angle, and it would play the track with relatively little to no error. Even upside down, I think one of the advertisements actually claimed, which would be pretty handy, I guess, if you're on a space shuttle and you had to listen to some, I don't know, Commander Tom, Ziggy Stardust or something like that. But the question is whether or not real world linear trackers are any better than, let's say, a direct drive or a belt drive at that. So I think linear tracking turntables was kind of like a, I don't know, maybe an academic exercise that became reality in, somebody thinking, geez, how can we reduce kind of tracking error? And what I mean by that is, if you think about a traditional turntable, let's say this is the turntable here and it's facing you, so the spindle's kind of in the center and you got the arm there. So the arm is going to move from the outer edge of the record towards the inside edge or inside label. And as the arm is moving, this is obviously an S arm. as the arm is moving towards the inside, as it kind of gets to this area here, before the end, there's a lot of opportunity for tracking error because of the angle of the arm and therefore the angle of the cartridge and the stylus, so on and so forth. Whereas a linear tracker, if you had the table here again and the spindle in the center, the linear tracker is going to go from the outside edge of the record like this to the inner label and not have that pivot, and hence for the same opportunity for tracking error. So I think theoretically, a linear tracker should be a better turntable, but I personally haven't experienced a linear tracking turntable that, like for like, let's say we take the Mitsubishi and we take a comparable turntable of the time, maybe it was a Denon, the flying saucer style or something like that. I can't say the Mitsubishi sounded any better. In fact, I would argue that I've heard plenty of turntables from that era that sounded better than linear trackers. And I've also had a Sony linear tracker in the past. Now, I know there's some better names out there, like maybe take a Revox, or even maybe the Rabco, I think it was, arm that they put on the HK turntables and stuff like that. I think even B&O made linear trackers. There's a lot of companies who made them. Technique's probably the most notable. In fact, I think Technique's introduced the P-mount cartridge specifically for their linear trackers, and then they extended it across their line. And that's another kind of thing to note, is that with some linear tracking turntables, you have less options for cartridge types. Now, the Mitsubishi used I think it was called a AT-12E, fairly modest cartridge on it, but some you're limited to, again, like a P-mount or whatever it may be. I think one of the bigger challenges, though, with linear trackers in reality, real world, is the likelihood of parts failing down the road. I know this Mitsubishi came to me with a replaced motor. They had a hard time finding a motor. It wasn't the original that they put back in it. But I mean, you've got optical sensors in these things that are controlling things like the lateral movement of the tone arm and stuff like that, and determining where the actual record is. Whether you got a 12-inch record or a little 45 or whatever. So there's a lot more to go wrong, and you've seen the picks inside of this unit. It developed its own issues. I think actually that thumping may have been related. I've read on some forums that kind of front arm that locked in position on that turntable, but it's more of an exotic kind of design, let's call it, which again is typically harder to service. And I've seen more linear trackers that don't work than do work. So there you have it. So my opinion is you get the Mitsubishi because of the format, because you want something that's cool that people walk in that say, wow, that's awesome. But it probably wouldn't be my daily driver turntable. It certainly definitely wouldn't be if I'm looking for something with sonic superiority. I wouldn't be buying the Mitsubishi for that either. I think there's far more better choices out there, and I think the Denon that we looked at far outperforms the Mitsubishi. But you buy it for the format, the cool factor, the fact that it's fully automatic, that it can cue forward track by track. You can hit pause, which lifts the arm up. I mean, it has just all these cool features to it. And they probably, have come down quite a bit in price as of late, as of a lot of things have. They were typically selling between 600 and 800 Canadian, which I wouldn't, after owning one, go out and pay that much for one. Maybe 400, 500 max. But even at that, it was not a turntable that blew me away by any sense of the imagination. So, parting kind of comments. Cool looking, robust enough at 12.5 kilos. Not a big heavy platter. It's only 1.3 kilo, but I don't think you needed it. Kind of exotic. You got DC servo motors, you've got optical sensors, all this sort of stuff. It's only a 2-speed, 76 signal to noise ratio, 15 hertz to 25,000 hertz frequency response. Whether or not those are accurate, I don't know, but in the 80s, everyone was about the specs. Definitely a better wow and flutter than the Dual would be. I mean, half, so 0.045 versus the 0.09 of the Duals. Theoretically should be a much better turntable than a lot of the traditional formats, but I'm not quite sure it is.
And now for a public service announcement. Record about to be chewed.
I can literally hear the vinyl being ripped off the record. Oh, guilty. Oh, but the guilt quickly fades as you witness the beauty of the Plum Crazy Purple and the sound that comes from these 1.5-inch speakers. So I went ahead and I got into the mood and I put a record weight on it. I mean, at least it has a lid, unlike the Elac that break. So there you have it. Now here is, well, probably the cheapest arm you've ever seen, with no adjustability and, well, there's speed control at least, and an auto stop at the end, which will stop. Bluetooth, line in, phono, volume control. You can plug your headphones in, and there is that genuine granite tipped cartridge. I'm just joking, by the way. And to be fair, it lifts, as you can see, and there it starts back up when you go back and stops again for some reason. One of the biggest problems actually is this cueing on these things. That arm doesn't fully drop down. In fact, sometimes you have to push the back of the tone arm to get it to play. And this is likely the most notable feature of the Victrola. As it's crossing to the center of the record stops right there for you, so that you can lift it up and inspect all the damage that you've caused. And again, it can do this weird starting and stopping function yet again. And if you think dual had a heavy platter, well, the Victrolix, well, this is where it's at. This plastic resin of a whole 1/2 gram, I guess. So I threw a mat on it because that will make it sound better. Glorious. I mean, it was meant for a record weight. You can see that suspension. Quite impressive. And so too is this adapter for 45s. I mean, that is quality if I've ever seen it before. And oh, the functions. Easy to close and lock it up and take it with you. Heck, you could plug it right into the back of your, I don't know, Krell integrated amplifier. Or you could take it directly to the, wait for it, any minute now. Soon enough we'll get there. The garbage. So I hope you enjoyed this threefold set of videos, doing a little shootout. My favorite of everything, I think you guessed it, was the Denon DPA 100. Definitely by far the best sounding turntable of the bunch. No doubt about it, the Empire is the best looking turntable, in the bunch. And I think your best value turntable is going to be your dual, whether it be a 1218 or a 1219. Spend the couple extra bucks and get the 19, in my opinion. And stay clear of the Victrola. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on the Vintage Vibe. Don't forget to like and subscribe.